Good afternoon, everyone. Are you guys surviving all three presentations? I feel like we're in presenter survivor. So this is the last presentation of the day, and so we're talking about disability today. And I wanted to start off by kind of giving you all a story. Do you all like stories? Okay, good. So I know this woman, and at the age of 2, she wasn't moving her right side very well. So the doctor diagnosed her with cerebral palsy. Do you all know what cerebral palsy is? Okay. For those of you who don't know, it's a neurological condition that affects muscle control. It can result in paralysis. It can impact speech and cognition. The prognosis by the doctor, of course, was not great. He told her mother she may not be able to walk and she would require support, all kinds of therapy and surgeries to keep her as normal as possible. But this actually did the opposite, surprisingly. The little girl felt abnormal. While other kids were outside playing, she was in one of many therapies or undergoing surgery. She was very shy as a result and was almost held back in kindergarten because the teachers thought she had an intellectual disability because she didn't talk. By the time she was 10 years old, her mother realized that her daughter was effectively missing out on life because of all the therapy and surgeries. So she made the conscious decision to stop everything and just do therapy at home with her daughter and allow her daughter to do what she wanted for a change. So her daughter decided that she wanted to play the piano, and she did so with one hand. She played tennis, she joined the swim team, and the mother found that her daughter was able to learn to accommodate her own disability if she just allowed her the chance to do so, despite her critics, and she did it very well. There was some failure along the way. Let me just add, track and volleyball didn't turn out so well. Since she had a shorter leg and a longer arm, she actually ended up in the nurse's station quite a few times. But overall, she was included. Her confidence grew as well as her friendships. She was still awkward in high school, and she was the victim of 1 or 2 bullies along the way, but she learned how to speak up for herself and adapt. She was given the space to grow outside of what people thought she could do, which opened up the eyes of others, as well as, more importantly, her own eyes. That her disability should not define her opportunity. That everyone should be given a chance to participate, even if it may be a little differently than everybody else. That little girl is me. While my disability may be considered by some, minor by some, I still encountered attitudinal barriers from professionals and outsiders that could have very well limited who I became. If it wasn't for my mom allowing me the chance to fail, and by telling those professionals to go away and, do something else, I would never have ever believed that I would be speaking in front of you all today and that I would have earned my doctorate degree. Unfortunately, though, over the last 30 years, these same attitudinal barriers that I faced persist today here in Arizona, nationally as well as internationally. In this session, we're going to talk about people with disabilities and their families, their stories, their barriers, what this state is doing in response, and what they still need our help with as a community. Oh, and I still have to figure out how to use this mouse. Okay, it's the wrong side. Okay, so first off, let's get on the same page as what disability is. Okay, when I say disability, what do I mean? So obviously, you didn't think I had a disability when I came in the room, because I'm not in a wheelchair. Disabilities come in all shapes and sizes. So there's 2 different kinds. There's this broader umbrella disability definition. It's a mental or physical condition that limits a major life activity. What we don't realize is that most of us, at some part or another, will be in this group at some point or another. It's even if it's temporarily. We're all, as we say in the disability community, we're all just one accident away. So it's fairly prominent. Now, when I talk about developmental disabilities, there's a lot of confusion about what this is. Developmental disabilities is not just intellectual, okay? It can be anything. I have a developmental disability with cerebral palsy. It's a lifelong disability that's acquired before the age of 22. And so it can be epilepsy, it could be autism, it could be intellectual, it could be somebody that has a mental health issue that was diagnosed, like bipolar disorder. So just to get on the same page as to what it is, disability comes in all shapes and sizes and types and significance and severities, okay? But they all still face the same attitudinal barriers as a group. So what I'm going to talk to you about today isn't just based on anecdotes. We at Morrison Institute believe in empirical-based data to guide our research. And so the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, we've been working with them for the last 5 years. They actually have a table in the exhibitors area. I'm supposed to tell you guys that. And there's a sign-in sheet if you guys want to get on their mailing list. But they actually helped fund us to be able to talk to families, individuals with disabilities across the state to find out what their stories were and what's happening and how we can make better policy here in Arizona. And so what I'm talking to you about today isn't just one or two stories, it's consistent themes that were drawn from these groups. And as you can see, we went a lot of places. In fact, I'm still tired from the last trip. We've seen a lot of people. So one thing we have to realize, and I don't think that we think about this as a community, is that disabilities is considered, it's not a health outcome anymore. It's a demographic group. And so when we look at disabilities, it's the largest minority group in the world. I don't know if you all realize that. But it's also the one that's very rarely talked about. We hardly ever hear about, look at the presidential debates we've had. How many times have we heard disability? Hardly ever, right? It's just hardly ever in the conversation. And so when we look at it in Arizona, we are the second largest minority group, and this is actually underreported. Keep in mind these are self-reports, so people don't often identify. And then secondly, that's not including institutionalized people who have disabilities. So this number, 12.2, is actually higher than that. We're thinking as a community, it's closer to 20%. So in Arizona, we have about 800,000 people with disabilities, and 120,000 of them have developmental disabilities. And so, for all of you who are from all over the state, just to show you what your county looks like, the darker green areas are the ones that have the largest prevalence of disability by percentage. And so the ones that have the highest percentages are Mojave counties, Gila, and Navajo. Now, Navajo is based on the whole diabetes issue there. They have a high percentage of people with diabetes. But Mojave and Gila, they have a higher 65 and over population, which may impact those numbers by population percentage. But anyway, this was surprising to me. I didn't realize that those counties were the highest proportion of disability. And so I can't go through this talk today without not mentioning the autism issue. You all have heard about this, that there is a skyrocketing number of children with autism now that are being diagnosed. I can't tell you as a researcher why that's happening. I mean, I get this question all the time. We're still trying to figure this out. We think it might be because we know what we're looking for now. We have a diagnosis. So 1 in 68 kids right now are being diagnosed with autism. It's showing up in our public schools here in Arizona. And 90% of those children are under the age of 21. What does that mean for us? Let me tell you, in Arizona, we're not prepared. Down the road, there'll be 7 times the number of adults with autism looking for services in the near future, but we don't have the trained professionals to be able to work with them that understand what autism is. So we really do have a potential health crisis on our hands because we haven't been able to deal with it. Oh, why can't I work this thing? Okay. In addition, we also have a high number of children in the K-12 public education system that are in special ed. Right now, there's 15% of public education are enrolled in special education. Did you all know that? It's a huge number. 25%, between 2003 and 2014, there's been a 25% increase of children that have been placed in special education, and that number is expected to grow. That is significantly higher than the 18% enrollment growth of the general population of students. So we really do have a large number of special education students. So now we know that there's a high number of people with disabilities in Arizona. We know there's a high number of students with disabilities in K-12 public education. And so at Morrison, we really did care about what do they think about things? Where are we at as a state? And so when we talked to people in focus groups and through surveys and through interviews, we all had the same consistent themes, no matter what their age, no matter what the disability. They all said that they did not like to be stereotyped based on their disability. Shocking, right? One of the first people said, I had the manager, I'm used to looking down at the screen. I had the manager tell me that I couldn't work there because I was retarded. I work harder and do more than other people, but I never get the opportunity. This individual just graduated high school. He was all excited to get a job, and then had that happen. And he is one of many stories like that we've heard about employer discrimination. And then another one said, I'm going into the special education advisory, and the other kids are questioning, what's that? Are all the kids in there retarded? Are you retarded with them too? And so we have an issue in public education where students are afraid to say that they're in special ed because they'll be bullied. And it's still a problem. We've focused on minority issues with ethnicity and race. We have not looked at the disability issue. And so often, parents are withdrawing their students from public ed because they don't feel like they're safe there, and they're putting them into private education, or they're homeschooling them. And really, we're not sure if that's the best option, if that we're trying to get them included in the community and life. And the last one, we talked to an adult. He was older, in his 40s, in Flagstaff. He's an artist, and he had a mild intellectual disability. He said, not everybody in the public is negative, but some people, that's just the way it is. They don't understand people with mild disabilities. The real world is cruel to people with disabilities. And this gentleman actually ends up segregating himself. All he does is hang out with people that have the same disabilities he does. And it really does do a disservice because he is a really talented artist and a great person to know, but he does not talk to many people outside of his community because he does not want to get talked down to. And so when we look at this issue of these attitudinal barriers that are happening in our society, we also have to look at home. Now, some parents are great, okay? And I'm not even saying anything bad about parents. I mean, parents are doing the best they can. But one thing to keep in mind is that parents often rely on agencies and professionals to help guide them on what to do. And sometimes when we've interviewed agency staff, they said they realize that they have a problem with having lowered expectations among youth with disabilities. And so if the parent is relying on the agency, we actually ran an analysis on this, and we found that the parents who actually relied on agency support had lower expectations for their child than parents who did not rely on agency support. And that was controlling for significance of disability. So there's something going on there. And so we have to figure out, not only is it just raising our expectations with society, but raising expectations with the agencies that work with our kids and work with our adults with disabilities. And so we asked parents and we asked youth with disabilities, what is the likelihood that you're going to be living on your own, supporting yourself, living away from home, graduating a 2 to 4 year college? So if you look at this, youth had a higher expectation for themselves than their parents. And one of their top worries was, my parents won't agree with what I want when I get out of school. Now, think about it this way. If you surveyed parents and youth without disabilities, how would this graph have looked? Wouldn't those bars, would the parents have higher expectations? Or would they be the same? But in this case, they're lower. And so we need to figure out how we can at least make this even where the expectations are similar and allow our kids the opportunity to fail. So what's happened is that here in Arizona, we have a significant problem with employment among people with disabilities. In fact, we're one of the worst states in the country when it comes to employment. Only 1 in 3 people with disabilities are employed. Now, you'll say, oh, this is not surprising because they have disabilities so they can't work. That's not true. We talked to people across the state about why they're not working, and they said that they were afraid they were going to lose their Social Security, which is $733 a month. So they're basically stuck making $733 a month because they don't think that they can work, or they're afraid that they're going to lose their job, when that's actually not true. There's all kinds of incentives for people not to lose their benefits. But people are scared. In addition, so they're not in the labor force. There's like 58.5% aren't even looking for work. And then you've got the people who are working at the same jobs, same number of hours. They're getting paid $10,000 less than people without disabilities. So there is an actual problem here with disparity on what they're getting paid. So this results in a higher poverty rate. 1 in 5 people with disabilities live in poverty. So what are we going to do about that? So there's a poverty cycle. That's not surprisingly. If you have a disability, you're automatically, in many cases, stuck in this cycle where your economic opportunities are already limited, which results in you being stigmatized, which results in you having reduced decision-making, results in your political decision-making exclusion. You're not able to vote as much, or you're not able to have as much power at the booth. And then you end up being excluded from society, and it's a cyclical effect. And it never gets better until we figure out how to break the cycle and give them access to economic opportunity. And so, here in Arizona, we have so many good things here. Okay, let me just say. But, so this is what we have. We have all kinds of resources for parents. If you can figure out how to navigate this maze. Okay, so this is the situation. This is what the resources that are available to help families get their individual with disabilities included in the community. The problem is that it's not just one number you call. You have to know to call each one of these different places. If you're a single mother, or you're somebody who works 50 hours, 60 hours a week, how are you going to have time to able to know where to call? I mean, there are some resources out there to help to make that easier, but the reality is that you still have to make those phone calls. And so in our study, we found that parents were often not able to access the services they needed timely because they didn't know where to call. They were so overwhelmed, they just gave up. And so we have to figure out how to help families better navigate this system. They're just totally overwhelmed, and they kept telling us that over and over again. We are so overwhelmed. And so we, as a state, have figured out, maybe we can figure out how to address employment, help families be able to give them more employment opportunities for their children. And so at the Division of Developmental Disabilities, they do provide employment programs. The problem is that they're still being pipelined into day programs. Do you guys know what those are? Okay, for those of you who don't know, day programs are basically recreational programs. So even though somebody could work and wants to work, their family may not want them to because they don't want them to lose their benefits, or they don't want them to be bullied in the workplace or have discrimination. So they go to day programs where they bowl, have art, pizza parties with other people with disabilities. The problem is that they're not able to live up to their potential and do what they want to do. When we talked to high schoolers, they all had different goals of what they wanted to do with their life, and it wasn't to go to a day program. But that's what's happening. So we have to figure out, and now as a state, just to commend DDD, they're working on trying to change this graph so it actually goes this direction into individual support employment, more on this end than that end. So they are trying to figure out how to reprioritize services. And we're working on becoming an employment-first state where youth, when they come out of high school, right now 1 in 3 youth with disabilities are not connected to anything. They're like on the couch at home. That's where they are. And so we're trying to figure out how to get them at least going to school, a vocational school, or into some kind of employment. So we are working on it as a state. Vocational rehabilitation is another one that does a great job on helping people get employed. The problem is that they're not fully funded. So we get a 1-to-4 federal funding match in the state, but we don't actually get the full state funds to be able to get that match. So we're on a permanent wait list for a lot of people, for people with significant disabilities. So they only serve the most significant disabilities first. So that is an issue there. So that is actually a resource that very few are able to access. So what winds up happening is that here in Arizona, we have the majority of people with developmental disabilities living with their families. That's a good thing and a bad thing, because they're not in institutions, and that's great compared to the rest of the country. The bad thing is that while they're living with their families, there's also reduced choice. When we talk to people, and you guys will appreciate this, when we talk to people that are living with their families, they said, but I still want to live on my own because I want to date. I want to have people over. I want to be able to pick what I want to wear. And these are like 28-year-olds, okay? And they're still feeling like they're held by the same rules by their parents as they were when they were 12. And so as adults with developmental disabilities, we have to keep in mind that they still want to have self-determination. They still want to have independence in their future. And so while we have a system that actually helps families live together, we are not good at giving them choices to be able to provide affordable housing in this state, or to provide a range of residential options where people can live independently with support. So we have to work on that. We have our issues cut out for us here, but there's opportunity as well. So this is what they said. We did a survey. This National Core Indicators is a national survey. It compares Arizona with 29 other states. So while we did really well on being able to give people the opportunity to live in the community, we didn't do so hot in this whole giving them control issue, which I just discussed. They couldn't date. They weren't able to help other people if they wanted to. They didn't. 1 in 3 talked to their neighbors. That's not good compared to the national average. They very rarely had a way to get to places that or 1 in 3 didn't have a way to get to places they wanted to go. So, and only 10% were able to volunteer. So they're living at home, but there's reduced options when they live at home. There's reduced control. And when we asked them, so we had these focus groups, and we asked them, what's going on? What's leading to exclusion? And they said that they can't it's harder in the rural communities to get around, especially if there's weather. With snow, getting up down on the sidewalks when there's snow is hard. If you have a gravel road or a dirt road, or you have terrain issues, it's hard if you have a chair to get around. And also this whole issue with going into buildings. We don't think about it, but the bathrooms, if they're not accessible, that is a major problem for people if they're trying to use the restroom in a public place. So they said that it's really tough for them to go out in some communities. We looked at Prescott Valley, we were in Yuma, we were in Sierra Vista, and so these were some issues that kept coming up. There was also this whole loss of control, which I just discussed, and this inaccessible transportation. So they have, in areas where there is transportation, they might just have transportation during the day, but not at night or on the weekends. So it gets really difficult. 5 minutes, guys. So the transportation still plays a key piece in them being included. Location ended up meaning everything for them. What we found was interesting is that, for example, in Yuma, they walked everywhere. And also in Prescott Valley, if they had a place that was centrally located, they walked over to their friend's house, they walked over to the grocery store. So it really does have to do with walkability. So even though we don't have these transportation systems in some areas, we have to look at how walkable the area is where they're located. And we also found that their social lives have often become professionalized. So if they have support staff in there that are helping them, or they have families, they often become their friends, and that's all the friends that they have. And their professionals actually become their friends. And when you have a high turnover of professionals, that's a significant issue. So that was often happening. And then they also had very few choices in employment, housing, or transportation. It was very limited options in what they could do. So not surprisingly, parents were worried about their future, especially when we had people, this one lady here, she was 70, and her son, who was 50, had autism. She said, my biggest problem as a parent is what is going to happen to him when I'm gone. My husband passed away 2 years ago. I always took him everywhere. We exposed him to everything. It was his idea to move to an apartment. We were against it, but it has worked out very well. He keeps his apartment very clean. He does all my chores, comes over to my house every day. He shops by himself. So she actually had to have her son with autism try it because she was worried, and he's doing well. She actually raised her expectations, and he's living independently with support. And she did that when he was 50. And in this situation, this adult with disability who's living with his parents said, you don't want to have to depend on people. You want to be able to be independent to do these things for yourself. So they realize that they need some support, but they also want to be able to be independent. And we have a problem in this system doing that. So what can we do as a community? So as a community, we can create more spaces for people to contribute. We can create more opportunities for them to volunteer in our communities. By raising our expectations of what they can do, it actually can raise expectations of other people and also themselves. It helps them build soft skills, it helps them build work skills, it helps them network. And we saw in our study that people that were actually able to have more expectations, like chores, volunteering, they actually also had higher aspirations for their future, and their parents had higher aspirations for them. And so what we found is that people are basically trapped in this disability bubble based on this label, where it has limited systems, limited resources, and we need to look outside that bubble, into our communities, into our neighborhoods, figure out how we can create mentors for them, maybe ride sharing. How do we do information networks? So things like that. How can we break this bubble and look more into our non-disability community? So we want to move from having Bobby just visiting and saying, oh, there's that boy with autism here, to here's that boy with autism, his name is Bobby, and he likes horses, to now Bobby is actually working here, and I know him and his family. We wanted to move from visiting community to active participation of the community. And as we found, I'm wrapping up, as we found in our study that the students who were finding jobs with significant disabilities did it on their own or through families or neighbors and friends. It wasn't through agencies. So we have to help people figure out how they can network. And rural areas were also twice as likely to have people employed, which I thought was really interesting. And you know why? Because they all know each other. They know their family. They gave them an opportunity. So as a community, we need to ask ourselves how we can give individuals more opportunities to be independent. How can they learn? How can they make mistakes and actually be able to grow? How can we build informal systems that can expand their horizons through mentoring networks, ride sharing, information exchanges, and support? Because we have a limited formal system, so we have to figure out how we can help support that with our communities. Okay. I think that was right? On time? And I'm just about to lose my voice. It's like an hour and a half. Thank you, guys.